So this distinction is quite simple, but it comes with a little bit of negatives as well. Hello and welcome. My name is Dorota, and I would like to welcome you on our next episode of Versus Monday. I think that the Versus Monday series will be evolving a little bit into answering questions why Dewey does things in a certain way, which is still a comparison, and it's still putting two opposite things against each other. So it is a little bit of a Versus Monday, but you might see that the series is evolving a little bit to answer more questions why Dewey is doing certain things in a certain way. What I would like to talk about today is dry suits, because one of our viewers, requested to talk a little bit more about how to control buoyancy in a dry suit and what the differences are and what the preferences are. And even if we are approaching summer now, and even if you might think, I can dive in my wetsuit anyway through summer, believe me that if you're diving in a cold water environment or even moderate climate, having a dry suit is really a very good thing because you can make the dives much longer and much more convenient. And even if for some tropical divers, the diving in cold water or moderate water might seem a little bit of heresy because, what is there to see? There is no corals, there is no good visibility, but there's plenty of very exciting dive sites like wrecks, deep corals or cold water corals as well that you can see. So really try to dive in your environment if you are living in a moderate climate. So if you are diving in that environment, sooner or later you will end up with a dry suit, if you would like to dive there frequently. So now, very generally speaking, a dry suit is watertight most of the time, but more importantly, airtight suit that you put on, which is equipped with seals that make it tight. It has a waterproof and gas-proof zipper that as well makes it tight. And the whole idea is that you will put air inside, so the air will act as a insulation against the environment. And in this way, the dry suit keeps you warm. But as you have potentially started to think, okay, I would have my BC or my wing, where I do have already some gas inside, and then I'm adding another thing that will have gas inside. So suddenly you are there with two buoyancy sources or two devices, two pieces of equipment that will influence your buoyancy. So the question is, which of those two you should use as your primary buoyancy device? Continue on talking on the dry suit and how we use it. Very generally speaking, it's not a dry suit course, as a disclaimer in the beginning. A dry suit will need to be equalized because the moment that you go down, the air that you have trapped inside will compress, you will get squeezed, and it is a little bit like, I'm not sure how a vacuumed food feels like because I have never been, but if you are descending deeper with your dry suit and if you're not equalizing it, you will feel really squeezed with the dry suit. So you need to equalize it, and you equalize it by adding gas. So you will have an inlet valve, but then on the way up, the gas will expand and you will need to vent that gas, and that's why you will have a dump valve or an outlet valve on your left, below your left shoulder, where when you are ascending or if you have too much gas in your suit, you will vent it. So you can see that potentially it might create a challenge that you will need to relearn, or you will need to learn new how to control your buoyancy. So now let's discuss what are the benefits of controlling your buoyancy only with the BC, only with the dry suit, because you might have seen potentially already, or you might have been taught that if you are using a dry suit, you should use your dry suit as a buoyancy controlling device while you are underwater, and you should use your BC or wing only at the surface. So now many agencies teach it that if you're putting the dry suit on, this becomes your primary buoyancy device. And it might sound quite logical because if I have two and I could only use one, it is a little bit simpler because you do not need to multitask, you do not need to remember, and potentially you might think, okay, I'm only using my dry suit underwater. If I'm on the surface, I'm using my wing. So this distinction is quite simple, but it comes with a little bit of negatives as well. So you might think now that you would be hitting two birds with one stone, because on one hand you will keep yourself warm by putting gas in your dry suit, And on the other hand, you will be able to control the buoyancy well because you will be using only one controlling device, so you might think that it's easier. But to be honest, there are some nuances, there are some things that you might not have been thinking about before, and instead of hitting a bird, you will hit yourself with this idiomatic stone. First thing that you would need to think about is how much gas the Drysuit will contain. So if you are thinking about controlling your buoyancy with your Drysuit, you will have quite a lot of gas inside. And for example, if you would end up having overinflated suit on the surface, the gas might escape through your neck seal. Very often as well underwater, when your suit is overfilled with gas, and if you are moving your head, looking at things, or looking at your teammates, or looking at students, the gas might as well escape through your neck seal. And of course, it's not a very big issue, but if you are neutrally buoyant and suddenly only with your head movement you are losing unpredictable amount of gas, you will not know exactly, or it will influence your neutral buoyancy in a way that you can't really predict how. If you learn how to use a dump valve on your BC, you might have the feeling on how much gas you need to release, but this will kind of dump amount of gas that you cannot predict. So this would be one thing that is not really very convenient. The second thing is that, as I have mentioned, that the Drysuit has a decent amount of volume. So for sure it will be enough to support you on the surface, it might be enough to support you underwater, but it is not as easily shaped or simply shaped as a wing or even as a classical style jacket BC. It has arms, it has legs, it has folds. It is most of the time a little bit bigger, so it doesn't fit very snugly, so you will have places and pockets of gas that it's being trapped. And the thing is that having that big amount of gas somewhere in your suit, it doesn't promote really a lot of balance, because if you are in a very nice flat position and you have a lot of gas everywhere, you have a lot of gas in your arms, you have a lot of gas in your boots, the moment that you start to shift your position, the gas will travel very dynamically and you will have challenges with either balance or even trim, because the gas is not only more, but it's as well distributed into more distant parts of yourself, like arms and especially boots, because there is no way of releasing gas from your boots. And if you are in a nice trim, your legs are most of the time higher, so your feet are higher, so the gas will eventually end up in your boots. And then the problem is that if you start ascending and if you do not manage it properly, you might end up ascending feet first, which is not really very graceful, and it is not really very safe as well, because you might end up even losing your fins, you might end up popping up on the surface with your feet up, and you might have a challenge even with turning head up or turning in a way that you can have your head out of the water, especially if the suit was overfilled with gas, which will happen if you would be using the Drysuit as a primary buoyancy source. So staying now with the complexity of the shape of the Drysuit, there is another thing that you will need to consider. So if you are at depth, controlling buoyancy is relatively easy because nothing changes. So the volume doesn't change, and then if you establish neutral buoyancy, even if the suit is overfilled with gas, you will kind of be able to swim. But now, if you are ascending, and then if you would like to get rid of excess gas, you will have only one valve that is releasing the gas, and it's on your left shoulder, and it has a specific capacity. So you will need to give a lot of time for this gas to escape. So first of all, I'm talking about amount of gas that you have, and it will take a lot of time to release that gas. The second thing is that the gas needs to travel from a distant place. It's always like a distant galaxy, because it has to travel from your boots, it has to travel from your legs, it has to travel through the torso, through all of the folds that you have in a Drysuit, and eventually after a while it reaches the valve and escapes. So it will take more time compared to releasing gas from your wing or from a jacket style BC. So this is another thing that you need to remember if you are managing your ascent, that releasing gas from the Drysuit will take longer time. Now there is another aspect that you can add to that speed, is that depending on the type of undergarment that you have under your Drysuit, because normally you would need to wear something that actually keeps you warm. It's not only the gas that will keep you warm. So many undergarments that are really very warm, they have this ability to hold gas. So they are very dense, the gas stays and it creates the insulation that you need. But because the gas is trapped in the undergarment, providing the insulation, it as well needs more time to escape. And very often you will see, if you are using a Drysuit with a specific type of undergarment, and very often it's a thin-sulate undergarment, that the time you need to get the gas out of your suit is really long. So you need to learn to be patient. You need to learn how to control your body to be in a proper position to allow that gas to travel from this distant galaxy of your feet through your body up to this arm to get released. So it's another thing that if you have a lot of gas, so if you are controlling your buoyancy only with your Drysuit, you might have challenges of having a controlled, nice, steady ascent. And as last, what I would like to talk about is combining one of the most common issues that divers have with controlling buoyancy only with your Drysuit. So the first problem is, or the first issue that we very often see, is that divers are overweighted. So they take too much weight compared to what they actually need, because either they lack the technique to go down, they are stressed, they don't breathe properly, so they cannot actually properly exhale. They don't have the patience to really exhale, wait, and then sink slowly down. And most of the time divers are overweighted. So now if we combine this, if you have too much weight to what you actually need, and you are controlling your buoyancy underwater with the Drysuit will be really filled. Probably most of you know how the figure of Michelin tires look like. It's the Michelin man who looks a little bit like an inflated doll. You will be looking like this underwater, and believe me, it's extremely inconvenient because the gas will be shifting from one side to the other side, from front to back, so you will have no proper good control over your balance. The other thing what will be, your volume will be bigger, so you will be having more drag. You will need to pull yourself through the water with all of this gas inside your Drysuit. Because you are overweighted, you will be as well pulling with you all of this weight that you carry. So all of this combined together would not only be inconvenient from a buoyancy control perspective, it was inconvenient from the perspective of how precise and how controlled my ascents can be. Then it will be as well adding to your exertion, to your breathing rate, to how quickly you use gas, potentially even to accumulation of CO2, and all of the problems that it is combined. You will need to work harder to swim because you will just be pushing this inflated you through the water with this additional weight that you carry. So what you have seen now, that controlling buoyancy only with your Drysuit underwater is not really a very good thing. But on the other hand, the other scenario that you have two buoyancy devices that you need to control. Because, to be honest, you cannot not to use a Drysuit if you have one, because you need to prevent squeezing by adding gas to the Drysuit, so you need to use it. So now, where's the trick? So how you could do the best for you to have it under control? So what we will be doing? We will be using both. So we will be using a BC or a wing, and we will be using a Drysuit while underwater. So you will need to learn how to manage both of those. And believe me, it's not really that hard as it might seem. It will be hard if you just jump into that experience without really considering the elements that you should be considering if you are having two separate buoyancy controlling devices. So generally speaking, we will use, as GUI divers, your wing or your jacket as the main buoyancy controlling device, because first of all, it's more compact. Secondly, it has a very clear shape that allows the gas to escape very quickly from this. And this is something that you have been doing for most of your career probably, and the Drysuit is the new thing. So BC, a wing, is your primary buoyancy device. Drysuit is more there to keep you warm. So keep you warm and keep you mobile. Remember what I said about potentially being laminated by your Drysuit if you do not add enough gas. So you will need to add a little bit of gas to your Drysuit to keep you comfortable. And comfortable, I mean temperature-wise, so it really provides you the comfort in relation to how cold or warm you feel. And the second thing, you will need to able to be moving. So you will need to add enough gas that you can reach your arms behind to close your valves, that you can stretch your arms, that you can move. Otherwise, it will be really very hard. So of course, it will be more complex in the beginning. And of course, you will add more task loading to the dynamic portion of your dive. So the two most critical elements, which are most of the time the most critical when it comes to controlling buoyancy when you are going down, so descent, and when you are coming up, so ascent. But as with everything, you just need to give yourself time. You need to practice in controlled environments. You need to understand what's going on and why things are working in a certain way. You need to work on your proper body position. So you will see that if you are in a proper trim, you need to know that you will have gas in your boots, then you will need to get off trim to release the gas from the shoulder that you have on your left side, the dump valve that you have on your left side. And then if you want to control the ascent, you have to go off trim to release gas from your suit, and then you will need to go off trim again to release the gas from your wing. So of course it requires a little bit of practice, but as with everything when you're adding a new piece of gear. So practice, experience, potentially guidance from an instructor is always welcome. You can do within GUE something that we call a Drysuit primer, which is a course that everybody can enter. You don't need to be pre-GUE trained, though I would recommend to have some GUE training before, where you can learn how to use your Drysuit. There is a video on GUE TV where I explain how to manage an ascent while having a Drysuit and controlling your buoyancy with the wing. So you can go to these additional resources. But the last thing that I would like to answer or discuss briefly is then if you see that controlling your buoyancy underwater should be mainly done with your wing, why certain agencies, they teach not to control buoyancy with your BC underwater, and they promote controlling the buoyancy with a Drysuit. And we have seen that it has many disadvantages, and the only advantage that it has, that it's simpler, and it's only one device. And as I mentioned before, you cannot not use Drysuit if you have it. So then they decided, okay, so let's put everything on a Drysuit. But I think the problem here is that the divers that will be going into that direction, especially if they have less training in regards of buoyancy, if they are not mastering the buoyancy properly from the very beginning, they will have even more challenges. So for me, it's not really solving a problem. It's hitting three birds with the same stone even, because then you are putting divers who are not having enough experience into a really bad habit, because it will be much harder for them to control the things that are not mastered already, so buoyancy. So from our perspective as GUE, we should be controlling the buoyancy underwater with the wing. Straight, simple, we learn this one from the very beginning, because we most of the time start with a wetsuit and a BC. And then if you are adding the Drysuit can be a supplement of a buoyancy, because there will be always some gas in, but it's not your primary buoyancy device. I hope that with video I could answer a little bit the question why GUE divers would control their buoyancy mainly with their wing or a BC, and they would leave the Drysuit off the equation of controlling buoyancy. If you would like to have more resources, go to GUE TV and check the videos that we have there about diving in a Drysuit. You can touch base with your local GUE instructor, and of course you can answer, or you can rather not answer, but ask any questions that you want below the video, and I will try to answer as quickly and efficiently as I can. I hope to see you on the next episode on Versus Monday, where I will be talking more about Drysuit. And then this time, so the next topic would be comparison between different types of Drysuits and why GUE would prefer one type of those. So we will be talking about neoprene Drysuits and crushed neoprene Drysuits and tri-laminate Drysuits, and see why GUE divers are deciding for one particular type of them. So stay tuned. I hope to see you in the next episode of Versus Monday. In the meantime, have fun diving. Fingers crossed that you can dive in your area. So thank you very much, and see you next time.